Hello everyone and welcome to another video here on White Coats and Corgis. Today I'm going to be showing you a clip from the Premed Experience, which is a free virtual event that I hosted back in March of 2023. Alright, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, great, thank you. So we already have a lot of questions with the Q&A feature. If any of you want to submit additional questions, we are more than happy to add additional questions. So right now, I'm just going to take a look at the questions, and Ziggy and I will do our best to answer the questions that we have here. So I'll take this next question. So this one is regarding the MCAT. Do you recommend taking baseline practice tests before you start studying? And my answer is yes, absolutely. And the reason why it's so important to start your MCAT preparation by taking a diagnostic test is really to, number one, learn what the MCAT is about. I guarantee you, for any of you who are in university and taking classes and final exams, you've never taken an exam like the MCAT before. I told you before, the exam is 7.5 hours long. So unless you've taken a 7.5 hour long exam that covers 12 semesters worth of science content, you really don't know what the MCAT is like. And beyond just learning what the MCAT is like, you also want to figure out where your starting point is. I know when you take your diagnostic test, you're going to get a score that you're not happy with. However, you're still going to see where you're starting. Are you starting in the 480s? Are you starting in the 490s? Are you starting in the 500s? And wherever you're starting, you want to think about how far away you are from your target score, because that informs you how much you need to study and how long you need to study for your exam. So for example, if you're looking for a 5 to 10 point improvement, you can easily get there with a good amount of work studying for maybe 2 to 4 months for the exam. But if, for example, you're looking for improving your score by over 20 points, in that case, you probably need to be studying for 6 months or more. So taking a diagnostic test can help gauge where you're starting and how much work you need to do. It can also help you to pinpoint if there are certain areas of weaknesses that you need to focus on for your studies. For example, if you take the exam and you did do pretty well in the Chem Phys section and the Biochem section, but the CAR section and Psych-Soc section scores weren't so great, then you know those are two areas for you to focus on.
Before I go on, Ken, I was wondering if I could even ask you a question. This is a question that I've been getting from a lot of my own clients based on personal experience. And I was just talking to a client yesterday, basically, and you probably hear this often. So I was wondering if you could share your pearls of wisdom about this situation. So it's, I had a client yesterday, wanted to talk to me, was so upset. She said, I did not get the MCAT score I wanted. I did so many practice exams and I was scoring so much higher on them and I worked so hard basically, but for some reason when I took the exam on that day, I got my score back and it wasn't as high as I wanted to, to get basically, kind of what happened and, what should I be doing from this point on, given that I sort of did as much as I could basically.
Yeah. That's a fantastic question. And for any of you who've taken the MCAT before and are thinking about retaking the exam, this is pretty much your situation. So I speak to a lot of students, and I'll say the first thing is you don't necessarily need to feel bad at all, right? The MCAT is a difficult exam, and half of all students who take the MCAT have to retake the exam, right? So if you think about taking the MCAT, it's pretty much a coin flip, right? So you flip a coin, if it's heads, okay, you only have to take it once. If you flip tails, you're going to have to retake the exam, right? It's super common for students to retake the exam. However, as Ziggy was referring to, they're trying to figure out what they need to be doing differently when they retake the exam such that they're hopefully going to be able to improve their score, right? It takes a lot of time and effort to study for the exam. You don't want to retake the exam and end up with the same score again. So in these situations, you always need to begin with an evaluation. So you need to reflect and think about, how did I study for the MCAT? And what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And these questions you should be asking yourself should include, did I put in as much effort as I wanted to for the MCAT? Or did I find myself procrastinating a lot for the MCAT? Did I review enough science content? Did I do enough practice problems? Was I scoring where I wanted to be on my practice exams with regard to my target score? Or was I never able to reach my target score in my practice exams, right? So start first by thinking about what you've previously done with your studies and what you would want to do differently next time, right? And the other thing I'll tell you is when you're doing this reflection, sometimes it can be tough to do. And that's because, you're thinking to yourself, okay, I read a set of MCAT books. I did a lot of practice problems. I did a lot of practice exams. I just can't figure out where I'm going wrong. In those cases where you're not sure what you need to be doing differently for your retake, my recommendation absolutely would be to speak with an expert, right? So if you speak with an expert, they can have a conversation with them about what you did last time with your studies, and they can tell you what are some of the things you could do differently to improve the next time. And in fact, if any of you are interested in signing up for a free consultation with one of our team members at Med School Coach, we'd love to speak with you and have a conversation about how we can help you with the MCAT. And in the link, you can see Selena just dropped in a link you can use to sign up for a consultation. We're happy to speak with you, discuss your personal situation.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So I think I can take the next question here. This one is asking, how is the MCAT scored? So in this case, just to give you more information about the MCAT, because I know earlier in my presentation, I was talking for the most part how to score well in the MCAT, not so much what the MCAT is. So you should know the MCAT has 4 sections. The first section is the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. That is a very long name. That's why people typically prefer to just say the Chem Phys section. The second section is the CARS section. The third section is the Bio-Chem section. And the fourth section is the Psych-Soc section. Each section has longer names, but the key thing is there are 4 sections on the exam. Now, each section is going to test different concepts. So the Chem Phys section is going to be focusing a lot on general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, biochemistry. The Bio-Chem section is going to have a lot of focus on biology and biochemistry. And the Psych-Soc section, of course, is focusing on psychology and sociology. All 4 of these sections, they receive a score between 118 to 132. So 118 is the lowest score, 132 is the highest score, and the scale is really a 15-point scale, right? Because from 118 to 132, there's 15 numbers. And one thing you might be thinking about is, why do we have such a weird scale, right? Like, why are you using 118 to 132 as opposed to 1 to 15 for all 4 sections? Well, there's several reasons why the AMC made this decision, but I would say one of the important ones is they wanted medical schools to focus on the students that were above average when it came to the MCAT exam. So right in the middle of that 15-point scale is a 125. So if you have a student who gets an average score in all 4 sections, they've got a 500. So that makes it very easy for medical school admissions committees to look at a student's score. If it's above 500, they're above average. If it's in the 400s, they are below average. So hopefully that gives you some context in terms of the MCAT format and how it's scored.
Oh, okay. Wow. Just sort of, Ken, while you're talking about this stuff, to piggyback off that, because I saw a good question there. Somebody asked when they should start scheduling, studying for the MCAT, basically planning a schedule for the MCAT, and how our programs even help with the scheduling of the sections, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So when to start studying for the MCAT is a really good question to ask. And there's actually another question you have to answer first as part of that, which is to figure out when you want to apply to medical school. So as if you were present earlier in the morning presentation by Dr. Marinelli, she was talking about the timeline for applying to medical schools. And you can apply as a traditional applicant. So that would be in the summer after your junior year. You can take a gap year, so that would be applying the summer after you graduate, or you can take multiple gap years. And at that point, you're just applying any period of time after you graduated. With regard to the MCAT, it's actually quite simple, which is you simply need to take the MCAT before you're going to apply to medical school. And because medical school applications generally open at the beginning of the summer around May or June, if you're able to take the MCAT by spring of that year you want to apply, then you're going to be good to go. However, it doesn't mean that you can't take the exam earlier. So there's a number of students who will take the MCAT earlier. So they'll take it in January, or they'll even take it the summer before they're planning on applying to medical school. There's really no right or wrong answer there. Any of those time periods are fine as long as you're taking the MCAT before you apply to medical school. Typically, what I recommend students to focus on is to think about when you're going to have a good period of time to be able to focus on the exam. So what I mean by that is you don't want to sign up to take the MCAT this May if you know your spring course load is going to be very heavy. You want to make sure that whatever test date you pick, the months before that test date are going to give you adequate time to be able to prepare for the exam. So that's why some students, they'll take lighter course loads in the fall to prepare for a January test date, or they'll take a lighter course load in the spring for an April or May test date. And there's also other students who they don't want to worry about classes at all. So they decide that they want to dedicate a summer to focusing on the MCAT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to piggyback off what Ken was saying, a sort of a related question often is, when is the late, if I'm applying, like this year, when is the latest I should be taking the MCAT, or can I take the MCAT basically? And I tell my clients that they should try not to take it any later than May, early June, basically, because if you do it much later than that, there's sort of like a domino effect on other parts of your application in terms of, secondaries, interviews, and all that kind of stuff. So those are other things just to keep in mind, basically, as you plan all these different moving parts. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find a good MCAT question for you here. You guys are asking amazing questions, basically. So we have like a plethora of good questions here, basically. Let's see, will they still like this? So here's one. Ken, so someone said earlier we were talking about gap years. What if I take the MCAT and then take a gap year and apply to medical school? Will they still accept the score, or would I have to take a new MCAT?
That's a great question. So I said earlier, all you really want to do is make sure you take the MCAT before you apply to medical school, but I should have qualified that to say that you don't want to make sure you take the MCAT too early, right? So you don't want to take the MCAT in your freshman year and, number one, you're not going to be ready. But the other important thing is that your MCAT score is not going to be valid forever, right? Mm-hmm. So for most medical schools, your MCAT score is going to be valid for 3 years. But the safest way to check this, of course, is for any medical school that you're interested in, if you look at their admissions website, they're always going to have information on when is the last or when is the oldest MCAT score that they're still accepting. So that's something that you can check just to make sure that when you take the MCAT, your score is still going to be valid when you choose to apply to medical school. So in this student situation, if you're planning on taking the MCAT and waiting a year until you apply, that's not a problem at all, because you're well within the 3 years that most medical schools will accept.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And there's a question here that I actually want to answer, because I think it's a follow-up to the question we asked earlier, when you should take the MCAT, especially if you're looking at gap years. So the student is asking, if you plan to take a gap year, would taking the MCAT in the fall of your senior year and applying for medical school in the spring of your senior year be the way to do that? So the first thing you'll want to be aware of is that the MCAT is not offered every month of the year. So specifically, the MCAT is offered from the months of January through September of each year. So that means the MCAT is actually not offered in October, November, or December, right? So if by fall you meant early fall in September, you certainly can do that, right? And then you can plan on applying for medical school in May/June of the following year. So that timeline can work perfectly fine, but just be aware that if you're looking at the fall, it's either September or you're looking at January. So that's what most students are looking at in the fall.
Oh, that's great. I wish I had heard this little talk before I was in college. I would have had a different trajectory back then. Anyway, no, that's really awesome. Thank you for that great advice. And I saw a great question on here, Ken, that I wanted to ask you. Hold on, let me just find it. Okay, hold on. So here's the question, Ken, and maybe we can even extrapolate from it a little bit. So the question is, do you know the best resources for learning and practicing biochemistry for the MCAT? I take the MCAT in September 2023, and I was not able to take the course yet. But I think that's a great question just in terms of resources in general. And if you don't mind my adding, sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes people can't afford to take all these courses or hire tutors and all that. And for those people, I'm not saying this person is in that situation, but for people who might be in that situation where budget is of a concern, if you have any thoughts about that, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've already discussed a lot of what you have to do as a pre-medical student, right? There's so much that you have to do in terms of classes, experiences, MCAT and such, but there's also a lot of cost associated with, the process of becoming a physician. The MCAT, for example, it costs $300 just to take the MCAT. Now, the AMC does offer what is called a fee assistance program. So for those with financial need, it's possible for you to take the MCAT for free and also pay lower costs for applying to medical school. So that is something that you should consider looking into if you are in need of help with finances. When it comes to preparation for the MCAT, there are so many different resources. I will say the most important thing is you have to use some resources. The MCAT is not like the SAT or the ACT. You can't just take the MCAT blind and just say, oh, I took these classes in college. I learned these science content. I got A's in these classes. I'm going to be fine with the MCAT. That's not how it works. The MCAT is going to test a lot of science content that you didn't learn in your college courses. And similarly, there's a lot of science content in your college courses that won't be tested on the MCAT. And that's because the curricula of your college courses doesn't match that of the MCAT. So you really do need to use resources that are specific to the MCAT for your preparation. And in terms of these resources, I would say there's essentially different tiers of resources, right? The first is actually what most students do for the MCAT, which is they use a DIY approach, right? Essentially, they purchase all of the resources they need. So that would be a set of MCAT books, as well as practice questions, right? And for these resources, they're typically lower cost, right? Especially when it comes to MCAT books. You can purchase a new set of books on Amazon for a couple $100, or you can purchase a previous edition for a small fraction of the cost. And practice exams, again, it's not too different in terms of the amount that you typically have to pay for a question bank. The other thing to realize is there are a lot of free resources out there. One of them that I'll certainly highlight is Khan Academy. So Khan Academy, if you haven't heard about, it's actually not just for the MCAT. Khan Academy has videos covering just about every subject out there. So if you're struggling in your organic chemistry class, you can check out the Khan Academy organic chemistry video lectures. They're quite good. So Khan Academy has videos covering the science content on the MCAT. They also have practice questions. Those are all free. The AMC also has a number of free practice exams and practice questions you can utilize as well. And that's typically what a lot of students would look to gather as resources. But there's also other resources that students will often turn to. So all of you right now are here at this free event, the Premed Experience, right? So you're always going to find a lot of events where people are happy to share their knowledge and expertise with pre-medical students. And if it's not at a live event like this, you can simply just go to YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in the search bar, biochemistry, metabolic pathways, biochemistry, gluconeogenesis, you can find dozens of videos on every science concept that is tested on the MCAT. So there's a surplus of resources out there for MCAT preparation. Now, for a lot of students, they're happy with this approach. They can get everything they need from what is readily available. There are some students who, instead of having to find all of these different resources on their own, They simply just wanted to have all of them in one location. So that's why a lot of students will choose to sign up for a prep course, right? So you can sign up for an MCAT course, and these are typically in the order of a couple $1,000s. So it's definitely more expensive than MCAT books and question banks. But in these cases, you attend a class, you've got an MCAT expert, they explain the key science concepts you need, and they also give you a bundle of resources as well. An MCAT class tends to be more passive, right? You're in a class with 30 students, and especially if you're taking an online class, you're typically just sitting there and you're being lectured to, right? The instructor's just talking to you. Whereas when you're doing one-on-one tutoring, it's very interactive. It's back and forth conversations. Your tutor is explaining the science concepts to you, but they're also asking you questions to check your comprehension. And you're also able to ask questions when there's something you don't understand. So because of that, we view MCAT tutoring really as being the most effective way for helping students to prepare for the exam. But hopefully that gives you a sense of, the different levels of cost when it comes to preparing for the MCAT. And there was one question that I wanted to answer here because I saw it in the chat for some time. So the question was non-traditional students, which I don't think we've touched on. So I think there's probably perspectives that we can address for both. I'm happy to talk about the MCAT aspect, and Ziggy, I'm sure you can talk about the application aspect. So the MCAT aspect is, this is a student that is working full-time. They took the MCAT in 2014. They got a competitive score. They have to retake the MCAT, and they want suggestions on how to do this, such as a part-time job. And the advising part is essentially, how do they present themselves as a non-traditional student compared to younger students? So I'll take the MCAT part first, which is, number one, if you've already taken the MCAT before and gotten a competitive score, that's fantastic. Because if you've already taken the MCAT before and gotten a good score, that's a very, very good indication that you're going to be able to retake the MCAT and get a good score again, right? Often, good test takers don't really lose that skill. So you'll be able to retake the exam, be able to get a good score. But of course, it is true that if the last time you took the MCAT was in 2014, you've probably forgotten a lot of science content. It's been 8 years. So indeed, you do need to find time to be able to focus on the MCAT. Now, I have worked with a lot of students who work full-time while studying for the MCAT. It can be done, but it's going to be tough because you have to think about it. You got to wake up in the morning, you got to commute to work, you've got to go to work, you got to commute home, you've got, to shower, to eat dinner and such, right? By the time you're done with your day, you might already be pretty tired. How much more studying can you still get done, right? I hear students tell me, oh, I can come home, I'm going to do 3 to 4 hours of studying on weekdays and 8 to 10 hours on weekends. That almost never happens, right? Like, more realistic is you might do 1 to 2 hours on weekdays and 6 to 8 hours on weekends at most. So you have to decide if you're okay doing that, working full time and studying in your spare time, then you can make that happen. But for a lot of people who are non-traditional students, because they have other life obligations they have to deal with, that spare time on the side really ends up just being a few hours each week, which is not enough time. So if that's your situation where you're not going to be able to find enough hours in the week to study, then I would absolutely agree with your recommendation of switching to a part-time job, right? Instead of working 5 days a week, can you work 2 to 3 days a week? Or can you work, can you cut your hours, right? If you're able to have more open time, then that would definitely make it easier for you to study for the MCAT. And I'll ask Ziggy to handle the application.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, and so just so the audience knows, we have about 4 more minutes left, basically. So I want to be mindful of that. But so we're getting to the end, basically. So in terms of non-traditional applicants, I touched upon this a little in the webinar, and it's such a great question. First of all, being a non-traditional applicant doesn't put you at a disadvantage. I think one of the things you want to do as a non-traditional applicant is sort of do a self-analysis of your prior career background and think about the knowledge and skills from there that are applicable as a future medical student and physician. And that's something you want to think of a way to try to package later on when you're working on your application in terms of the personal statement, secondaries later on, presenting yourself in interviews. Now, the one area that if you're like a career changer or something like that, the one area as a non-traditional applicant, the one area that you really want to be mindful of as you work on your application and think about how you present yourself is on the personal statement, right? And so one of the things that you really want to sort of have a neon light about is really detailing why you are making the switch from whatever career you had before to the to wanting to become a physician. And I would argue this is also relevant to people who are in the healthcare field. I have some clients who were like a nurse before and they want to become a physician now. Well, they're both amazing types of healthcare providers, right? So it's incumbent on you to detail why becoming a physician specifically is so important to you and in your life, basically. And I think if you can get that across in an authentic way that's backed with evidence to show that you've done due diligence on understanding what the life of a physician entails, basically, and then combining that with sort of the unique knowledge and skills that you might have gained from your prior career, I think that's a great way. I had a client, I think I did a mock interview with her. She had like done stand-up comedy in New York City, which I thought was just like amazing. But can you, I can imagine, applying some skills from there to being a physician later, basically. So my point is don't short shrift, any of the experiences that you might have had before in your life as you sort of look to move forward and become a physician later on.